Okay, so let's talk a bit about security. This presentation is going to be available on GitHub. It isn't yet, but I'm just going to push it after all of this is done. You'll be able to find it on my GitHub account. It's my first remote presentation, so please be forgiving, especially for the typos. You cannot write questions, just ask them, because I won't see them. And I have some demo section, and it's probably not going to work. And that's just a disclaimer. That's a really big topic, actually. Not all of the tools that I'm gonna show today are available. Hopefully, all of them are gonna be available soon. And some of the things that I'm gonna present are gonna be merged into RubyGems in a week or 2 weeks, depending on how things go. For people that don't know me, I do some Kafka stuff, I do some security stuff, and I do some open source. And I work at Castle, and we try to provide, and we do provide actually end-to-end solutions for user threats in general. I organize Krakow Ruby user group that is not working at the moment. And we had to cancel the Karafka RB conference for this year because of, not the best year ever. You can find me on Twitter, you can find me on GitHub, or you can just mail me a question if you have any. By any means, I'm not a security researcher. I know nothing about security. And that's just a bit of my research and, reading through RubyGems, source codes, and just building stuff to automate things that I try to tackle in the place where I work. I am a bit paranoid about security though. What I hope to leave you with is just a bit of awareness that using RubyGems shouldn't be taken lightly, and that there are things you should take into consideration when adding every single gem and when adding new developers that will add gems and so on. I'll just briefly go through what is RubyGems, then I'll talk about some of the attacks that are happening on RubyGems, some of the risks that are connected to the attacks, and how you can countermeasure some of them. And if we have a bit of time, I'm gonna talk about how I plan to make the RubyGems ecosystem a bit more consistent and a bit better. So RubyGems, it's just a package manager. I hope everyone knows it. It's been 16 years since it was built, and to be honest, it didn't change that much. The API is almost the same. It works in a really simple way. Actually, when I compared it with npm /yarn, it's much easier to work with, especially for building security tools and stuff like that. It's much easier than any other packaging system, which kind of makes it also easier to set up certain types of attacks, like the one that Gavin Miller did a couple months ago for Man in the Middle. But I'm going to talk about it briefly in a couple of minutes. There are in between 2 and 4 new gems added every single day to RubyGems. There are around 71 downloads of gems per second, and it's a pretty impressive number. And obviously, it wouldn't work without Bundler. Bundler, as far as I remember, is now part of the Ruby standard library. And it's also a really interesting piece of code. If I have enough time, I'm gonna tell you 1 or 2 things about it. But let's get to the risks that are. If you're interested in some live examples of designing attacks, that you can embed in RubyGems. You can actually watch my talk from RubyKite last year. I made some POCs for some of the attacks, successful ones. Definitely worth checking out if you're interested in doing something like that in scale. You can find some nice inspirations and ideas on what you can actually achieve with that. What is worth keeping in mind is that there are many types of risks, and not all of them are actually related to security. And in the end, if you're attacked, you can end up having your system taken down. You can have your system being converted into a mining setup. It can act as a botnet. You can lose your data. You can have data leakages, or you can be facing some legal risks when using any type of open source software with a license, for example. And there are a couple really popular vectors of attacks, and they aren't related only to RubyGems. I'm using RubyGems as an example. I deal with RubyGems on the backend side of Castle on a daily basis, so it's my field of expertise, if I can say so. So I'll quickly go through all of them one by one with you guys. If for those that do not know, typosquatting is just a type of an attack that relies on making typos. And something similar is bit squatting, when actually it's a CPU making typos for any crazy reasons. It happens once in a while. For some of the domains that I set up for BKB 2019, there were like up to 6 requests that were bit squatted and caught. Although I wasn't able to extend it into full-scale attack because of how RubyGems work. But that's for a different presentation, or we can have a follow-up discussion on that one. But in general, just keep in mind that people make typos, a lot of them, and that's a really, really good way of making your code being injected into systems. It's the easiest one, actually. And there are many examples. This year, 700 gem typosquattings were created, or even more. There's still a couple up and running. SPEC is mine. Atlas Client isn't. It was an attack from March 2020. There are some good people running typosquatting, creating some gems that would just set up the gem that you desired. And if you look at the total downloads, people actually download that. They make typos, whether they do the gem install or set it up in Bundler without double checking things. 10,000 requests for reals. There are a couple more interesting things. So there's one that is from 2 days ago, actually. There's Damaro Levenstein, and there's Damaro Levenstein. If you didn't look closely, they actually have the same description, exactly the same description. They differ only by one letter, which is H in the Levenstein. I'm pretty sure people can actually make this typo. Levenstein isn't something you usually type with an H, which is the correct spelling for it. What is really interesting about this pair is that I check it. So I have a system that notifies me that, hey, there seems to be something off with this pair. They sound similar. They have the same descriptions. They kind of look alike. So I started looking into the diff of them. What is the difference in the code of the same versions? And it turns out there isn't anything malicious. Someone just lowered the restrictions on the dependencies for Ruby. We can make a assumption that, hey, they needed to run Levenstein algorithm with Ruby 2.4. Maybe that was the case. Although looking at the history of past year or two, it might be that it's just a setup for a new account someone is setting up valid typosquattings with a bit of justification behind it, just to make it to the RubyGems, just to make it slip all of the checks, because RubyGems people won't yank it. There isn't any reason to do it. There is no bad code in it. There's just a bit of dependency relaxing on as a like outcome of this gem, but it's at the moment, right? No one knows what's going to happen in a month or two, and there's going to be a new version released. Maybe it's going to have something malicious. It is not malicious, don't get me wrong. This Levenstein isn't malicious, but it's definitely something that I've seen that ended up being a type of squatting attack. Generating malicious gems is super easy. There's a lot of code for generating typosquatting names. You can just automate all of this. And RubyGems does prevent from registering the gem names with typos, but only for the most popular libraries. The reasoning for that is there are so many gems, and people just create other gems, that if we would block all of the things that would seem like typosquattings, there is a chance we might run out of cool short names. So we can always just book things. If you're not thinking about making any attacks at the moment, but you would like to do them in the future, just book 100 names, and without any malicious code, you should be fine. Unless you book them from a single account, that it might look weird. I might spend some time looking into that. So just create accounts, and one a day. After 100 days, you're gonna have a decent setup for trying to attack people using RubyGems. Another great example of typosquatting is source squatting. It is kind of similar to what I did with bit squatting, but a nicer and a really interesting way of attacking. Gavin Miller spent a bit of time setting it up. I highly recommend reading this article. What it does, he just set up a typosquatted RubyGems names, and then he would create a fake RubyGems server that would serve his own gems with a bit of code injected into them. It's really easy to do. Majority of the gems are unsigned. People don't verify the signatures. No one relies on that, so you can just inject whatever you want, repack the gems, and ship them with your own exploits in them. And he had a really nice, I would say, success story with it. A scary one though, but well, still a success story. One thing that is much more problematic is something called malicious takeovers. And it's problematic because it comes down to social engineering. You don't attack gems, you don't attack the platform, you actually attack people by making them your friends. So you can just quickly mine through RubyGems. You can use the RubyGems data dump for looking for gems that are popular but aren't well maintained. And then you can just automate Rubocop patches, some quality fixes, typo fixes, and so on. Majority of the maintainers will be happy to accept pull requests like that, and then you can ask them for an ownership because they're clearly not maintaining the gems. You can just send them a message like, "Hey, we're using it. I'm willing to maintain it," and boom, you have release permissions. And this is what happened. It happened in Node.js world. I don't recall any case like this in RubyGems though. There is a similar one that I'm going to talk about, but I don't recall any cases like this. For RubyGems, it did happen for Node, and it was a big thing. And when you get permissions, you can do whatever you want. Just push to RubyGems without pushing to GitHub. People might not notice. Push something to GitHub and then push something else to RubyGems. 99.9% no one will check it except me, because people check things on GitHub instead of on RubyGems. There's one more case. There's an account takeover where someone uses leaked credentials database and tries to log in using the leaked login and passwords, emails or passwords. And this is how REST client was attacked. The owner of REST client library was just compromised, and someone crafted a malicious package, and it just got hacked. And what was pushed there, you can check here. This is the code that was injected, except like a normal code, you know, that came that would just look legit, some small changes, but then there's this really nice looking botnet running. Luckily for us, I'm working on. I'm almost done with Castle helping RubyGems to remove this threat. We're gonna release something together with RubyGems to actually track attempts of account takeovers and to detect them and to react before gems are being compromised. So soon it's not gonna be a big deal. And one that is really interesting that I found, I think in April this year, is something I call accidental injection, because actually it is an accidental form of attack. And it's really interesting because it's the first time I actually seen it in my career. So someone had like a malicious software on their laptop, on a Windows one. And during the release of a gem, one of the keys got infected. It would have the same size. It would have like it looked normal, like an encrypted token, but it would contain a malicious payload that would try to download a Bitcoin miner when it would be used on Windows. But what is really interesting, it was the tampered content of this token was available only for the last 2 releases for this gem. So I reached out to the owner, and by exchanging some emails, we figured out that, hey, there's something fishy running on the laptop on which the owner was working. It probably was infecting random files or some tokens or whatever, some sort of files. It wasn't a targeted RubyGems attack, but it was still really interesting that it got injected into the token. Token became an executable, and then someone just made a release, and without knowing, boom, there we have some sort of malicious software in RubyGems. There are actually some valid cases where malicious software is present on RubyGems. If we have enough time, I can relate to that at the end of the presentation. And there's one more thing that people forget about. RubyGems can be hacked. So if you're a gem owner and you release a gem, it doesn't mean, unless you sign it and you verify your own signatures, beyond that, there's no warranty that when you're downloading the gem, that it actually contains the code that the owner shipped it with. We kind of need to trust RubyGems. I have some countermeasures to tackle that. I'm going to talk about that soon. But it's something that people don't forget about. Well, RubyGems is by default like write only. There are no updates to gem versions, but it doesn't mean that someone with a lot of effort, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible, wouldn't be able to go to the RubyGems S3 setup and just replace some of the gem packages. What is worth keeping in mind, and you can learn more about it looking at my last year's Kaiki presentation. Just running bundle install is more than enough to get an access to your machine. You don't have to run this Rails application, whatever, just putting a gem name, running bundle install, that's done. That's all that is needed to infect the system on which you're developing. And to be honest, you can do whatever you want with it. You can infect other libraries, you can infect other packages, you can just fork the process, do whatever you want, because you work with the same permissions as the user that is running bundle install. Unfortunately, there are still people running bundle install with root permissions. I don't recommend this, but even without it, unless you're like working fully Docker with containerized setup, well, you're kind of exposed to this risk. And it's not only a theoretical problem. It did happen. RubyGems set up a 2FA to actually countermeasure that a bit, so owners can, be protected. Unfortunately, not many of the users use it. Well, some of the most popular libraries are 2FA by all of the owners, but not many. The reason for this is that many of the gems releases are handled for bigger companies by bots like AWS, and there's no one actually making releases except machines. And then, having a 2FA might be a bit complicated. RubyGems is getting better, and that's what I wanted to tell you as well. I'm sharing all of my discoveries. We're kind of working out some ways to automate some of the security checks and run them before the gem is being released to public. That's not easy though. RubyGems, despite being that popular, does not have a lot of engineering resources and a lot of money to work. It's not like NPM that is backed up by, Microsoft now. It's not a commercial project, it's a non-profit, so it's a bit harder, but it is moving forward. But before all of it, it's like all of the things are done by RubyGems, which is not going to happen ever. There's a couple of countermeasures you can take. You can just stop using computers, like Yoshitake Sakurada, a minister of cybersecurity that doesn't know how to use computers. He won't be hacked, so yeah, that is an option. You can rely only on your code, and believe me, there are companies that do that. Not often for Rails, for Ruby, but there are companies that homebrewed majority of the software that they're running. The sad thing is that there isn't one general solution to tackle all of that. Ruby is a super dynamic language, and soon we're going to have a send that has a different meaning than it used to for some of the objects. So it's really, really hard to analyze the code just by looking at it or just designing machines to do it. It's not an easy task, so there's always going to be a loophole there. But one of the things that is really important is to use verified sources. Both of the sources that you can see look exactly the same. It's just RubyGems. The problem is with the bytes, and it's something called international domain name homograph attack. You use letters that look exactly like the ones that but they have a different bytecode. And for some of the combinations, you can buy domains like that. And then you can kind of create a tutorial with Rails setup. You can copy the bundle from this page. Boom, that's done, right? Looks legit. You just copy paste it. I know that I'm probably talking to experienced developers, not people that just want to learn Rails. But this is the case. And looking at the Gavin Miller's article and things that he did, that's definitely a still valid case for our ecosystem. You need to be super aware of typosquattings because you can make a mistake, but just by running bundle, and even if it fails, well, if it fails, it shouldn't download. But if it works, and you did the typosquatting with a library that is infected, well, that's all that the attacker needed. As a side note, you should review the library's policy, library's licenses. There's so many libraries without license on RubyGems, and even if you scan the code, because not all the people update the gems spec with a license, even if you scan the source code, there's still at least 30% of libraries that don't have any license, and you shouldn't be using them. But people do, and I'll show you an example. There's just like a legal risk. If you have any gems that aren't maintained, consider abandoning them, or consider taking them over or forking them and maintaining them yourself, because the probability that they're going to be attacked is a bit higher than for the popular libraries that get a lot of attention from the owners. Do not use gems that are new. If a gem is younger than a month, I'm not saying that it's infected or malicious, but the majority of the typosquatting attacks were automated. The attackers would just create a lot of gems with similar names, and they would just be fairly young. So let them be for a while, unless those are your gems you control. You probably want to connect critical CVEs with your PagerDuty call for production systems. That's like a general advice, not only related to RubyGems. Never install gems without running some sort of vendor assessment on authors, on gems, and especially on the sources. Introduce some sort of bumping policy, whether you bump it, let's say, once a week, once a month, libraries you're working with. But before you actually bump, you need to review the code, because bumping means installing, and installing is bad unless you've checked the sources. Review the code. Actually, there are attacks that wouldn't be noticeable just by reviewing the code, because they rely on hiding executables and images, for example, or encrypted keys with the accidental injections. If you use automatic bumping tools, please make sure that you have a really well isolated multi-stage CI flow. Don't run specs and then don't build and push your Docker images, for example, production Docker images in the same pipeline, because you might be exposing environment variables that will allow someone else to inject their own Docker containers into your system. Review the bumps before installing. It doesn't always mean you need to review all of the code, but it's really good to check that let's say a release was announced that the library is behind 2FA and so on. It doesn't always mean reviewing the sources, but still reviewing the sources is the best way to go. But you need to review this against RubyGems data, not against GitHub, GitLab, or any other Git provider, because GitHub is not RubyGems. But there's going to be a really nice button soon that will show you the changes in between the version you're interested in and the previous version of the gem. It should be deployed in like a week or two. I don't know the time frame here, but you're not going to miss it. If you're interested in any version of a gem and you want to see the difference against a previous version, you can even do it now. I need to share my whole screen. So some questions. The best Slack. Okay, it's not a question. Okay, I'm sharing my whole desktop. So you can go to something called my Diffend.io. You can use gems. Let's pick Sidekick and let's pick 600. And if you type pref from previous, it will just diff it against the previous version of the gem. So this is what's going to happen with the review changes. You'll be redirected here, and the diff from RubyGems gems will be computed for you, so you can just review it and make sure that there isn't anything that would look suspicious. So yeah, you can do it on the Diffend IO. That's a platform that I built. It's free of charge. It helps to automate some of those things. It also acts as a validation layer for building a security pipeline at the moment for RubyGems, but I'm thinking of expanding the logic to at least to JS and Python. We analyze packages, we try to find vulnerabilities and quality problems. By quality, I mean problems with licenses, with pushing really weird stuff together with the sources of gems and a couple other things. And we plan to run it to improve the ecosystem by either opening issues on GitHub or by opening pull requests to fix certain things that we notice. You can just pick whatever versions you want of the gem you're interested in, and you'll just get a diff. Simple as that. It has a lot more options, and that's what I wanted to show you in a really quick demo. I will be using RubyGems library just to show you that people use libraries without a license. I hope you see all of my screen. Do you see my shell?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the shell.
Okay, so there's like one-click installer. Technically speaking, the registration is at the moment blocked, but you can bypass it just by running a script. Obviously, you can review the content of the script if you're not feeling safe running code from the internet in your shell. It's available. It doesn't have any evals or anything like that. It's just a Ruby script. So I have it just RubyGems. RubyGems.org fork here without any changes, and you can just run it. You need to provide an email, and you'll get an invite, and then everything happens for you. So you just press enter, and we installed the Diffend plugin, which is available on RubyGems. You can review the diffs of the Diffend plugin as well if you're interested in. And whenever it detects anything suspicious, it will disallow you from actually downloading the packages, and it will give you a justification. By default, it doesn't block downloading because there's so many people with legacy systems, but it will give you a link to a verdict. So you can just go to a website. Oh, sorry, I need to confirm my account because I need to log out and open my email. Confirm my own account. Yeah, here we are. So we get a verdict with a score, and then you can review all of the things that we think with the default settings are suspicious. So for example, it pinpointed that Graph-tastic is probably not maintained because it didn't have any releases for like 8 years. So let's check it out. Archived. You probably don't want to use it because it clearly it isn't maintained. But what is more interesting is that Diffend pinpointed that there are some typosquattings, but that's probably a bit of noise. CV for Rails, because I pulled it like a week ago. That's also nothing special. But what is really interesting, at least for me, is that RubyGems is using libraries under the hood that don't have a license. So technically speaking, no one should be allowed to use them, because no license means, well, it's a proprietary code. No license here. You can download the gem, you can open it, and you can notice that there is no license as well. You can open some files. Maybe they have license, they don't. And this means, well, you shouldn't be using this library because it is a proprietary stuff. And there are like licensing issues for some of the things. So what basically Diffend does, collects all of the metadata about your gem file, excluding the private sources. We don't collect things like that. We don't send this to the different servers. And it runs it through a set of checks, both for security and quality assurance and licensing assurance. And it gives you a verdict. If you're really restrictive within your organization, you can just say that if there's anything suspicious for install, update, well, for exec not, because it would break production, but for install and update, just don't allow to download the gem unless it's been explicitly allowed with, knowing that, yeah, I accept that Graph-tastic isn't maintained, I don't have time to deal with it, I will allow it to run. And this is the whole idea, that we run all of the checks before you're allowed to download a version of the library. So you can play with it like this. There are a couple more features, but they're probably documented in the documentation, and if not, well, you can just play. It's free, it's a beta, so don't expect it to always work, but it's definitely a good way to explore your gem file and understand what the hell is happening inside. We track quality of releases of the gems. We have some checks that make sure that there is a valid license. We have some checks making sure that people don't push 500 megabytes of logs. They do. We have some checks to ensure that there aren't weird executables and stuff like that, both for security and like quality assurance. Gems just should be tidy. We track the risks. Each of the releases gets something like a risk score. You can see here that majority of the gem releases are with a low risk score, coupled with medium, and almost no with high risk score, and this is desirable. And each of the gems with the high risk score is being manually checked by me or my friend Tomek that is helping me with the Diffend platform. And this is the whole idea. We plan to improve the ecosystem because with each of the release, we look if there wasn't some credentials leaked by accident or big log files or cached assets. There are so many gems with cached assets by accident because people don't look what is inside the bundle payload that they've built. I don't know why, but people tend to have fonts with executable permissions and images, normal images with executable permissions. Many of the popular gems don't have a license defined in the gem spec or don't have a license defined in the gem spec and in the source code. And what is on GitHub, it doesn't matter. You download gems from RubyGems. So this is the place that should have a license. And people tend to commit all of their vendor data, and there's like a huge mess when you analyze that because, there's some gems that rely on 25 other gems, and you end up having all of this code being shipped to you without any reason because you don't use it. You're actually using based on gems resold based on the gem spec. So the vendor data is just lying there without any reason. If you're interested in helping, you can. If you set it up, if you set up Diffend for your projects, from time to time, we might ask you to review some of the changes from some of the gems you might be using. We never ask to review anything from gems you are not using. So it's a win-win. You can open this review link, you can check the source code, and you can, for example, mark it as a safe. We used it as a signal. It won't mean that all of the people will automatically be able to use the version of this gem. It's like one of the signals because we cannot, if you're planning to do something malicious, you can as well approve it on Diffend. It wouldn't make any sense. But we use it as one of the signals, especially if you mark something as problematic. We're working on building a sandbox that will run a modified MRI. It will bundle the gem that is being released to check how it behaves within a non-Rails and a Rails system, especially looking from an IO and from an IO perspective, which is the TCP and system operations, to see if there's anything suspicious, external calls on or stuff like that. it's still like an early stage. It's gonna take at least a year to develop, but we're working on it. So yeah, we're getting better at it. And as a summary, trust no one. You definitely want to review the Diffend plugin code. Update things when you're actually sure that they're valid. I definitely recommend tracking changes, not only for the security reasons, but also just to understand the scope of the changes for libraries you're using. You want to do it if you have like a mission critical system. Run isolated stages on the CI, build up a security flow for your organization that matches your profile. If you deal with financial data, if you deal with medical stuff, you really want to be aware of what the hell is going on in your system. And please give it a shot to use Diffend, even for like seeing what you have in your gem file. And if you're interested in reading more, here are a couple links up on some of the attacks or other things, and you can always ping me. Thank you.